Chapter 41. Before the herd had passed San Antonio, they nearly lost Lippy in a freak accident with the wagon. It was a hot day, and the herd was moseying along at a slow rate. The mosquitoes were thinning a little, to everyone's satisfaction, and the cowboys were riding along half asleep in their saddles when the trouble started. The herd had just crossed a creek when the newts saw the stock running and looked back to see the wagon racing for the creek like Comanches were after it. Bull was not on the seat either, and the mules ran unchecked. Lippy was on the seat, but he didn't have the reins and couldn't stop the team. Jim Rainey was in the rear, and thinking to be helpful, turned back to try to head the mules. In fact, the mules refused to be headed, and all Jim accomplished was to turn them out of the easy track where the herd had crossed, which caused them to strike the creek at a place where the bank dropped off about 3 feet. Newt saw there was going to be a terrible wreck, but short of shooting the mules, had no way to stop it. What he couldn't understand was why Lippy didn't jump. He sat on the seat, frozen and helpless, as the mules raced right off the cut bank. As they were going off, Newt saw that the tail of Lippy's old brown coat had gotten pinched in the wagon seat, which explained his not having jumped. The wagon tipped straight down, bounced once, and turned completely over just as it hit the water. The mule, still hitched to it, fell backwards on top of the mess. All 4 wagon wheels were spinning in the air when Newt and the Raineys jumped off their horses. The trouble was, they had no idea what to do next. Fortunately, Augustus had seen the commotion and in a minute was in the water on old Malaria. He threw a loop over one of the spinning wheels and spurred the big horse vigorously, pulling the wagon to a tilt on one edge. "Fish 'em out, boys, otherwise we'll have to go all the way to Montana with no piano player," he said, though privately he doubted his efforts would do any good. The wagon had landed smack on top of Lippy. If he wasn't drowned, he probably had a broken neck. When the wagon tilted, Newt saw Lippy's legs. He and the Raineys waded in and tried to get him loose, but the coat was still pinched in the seat. All they could do was get his head above water, though his head was so covered with mud that it was difficult at first to know if he was dead or alive. Fortunately, P soon rode up and cut the coat loose with his bowie knife. "He's a mudhead, ain't he?" P said, carefully wiping his knife on his pant legs. "Now I guess he'll be mad at me for 10 years because I ruined his coat." Lippy was limp as a rag and hadn't moved a muscle. Newt felt sick to his stomach. Once more on a perfectly nice day with everything going well, death had struck and taken another of his friends. Lippy had been part of his life since he could remember. When he was a child, Lippy had occasionally taken him into the saloon and let him bang on the piano. Now they'd have to bury him as they had buried Sean. Strangely, neither P nor Gus was much concerned. The mules had regained their feet and stood in the shallow water, swishing their tails and looking sleepy. Call rode up about that time. He had been at the head of the herd with Dish Boggett. "Ain't nobody gonna unhitch them mules?" he asked. A big sack of flour had been thrown out of the wagon and lay in the river getting ruined. Newt had not noticed until the captain pointed at it. "Well, I ain't," Augustus said. "The boys can. Their feet's already wet." It seemed to Newt everyone was being mighty callous about Lippy, who lay on the river bank. Then to his surprise, Lippy, whose head was still covered with mud, rolled over and began to belch. Belched water. He belched and vomited for several minutes, making a horrible sound, but Newt's relief that he was not dead was so great that he welcomed the sound and waded out to help the Raineys unhitch the mules. It soon became clear that the wagon bed had been damaged beyond repair in the accident. When it was righted, all the goods that had been in it floated into the shallow water. "What a place for a shipwreck," Augustus said. "I've never seen a wagon break in two before," P said. The wagon bed, old and rotten, had burst upon impact. Several cowboys rode up and began to fish their bedrolls out of the muddy water. "What became of Bull?" P asked. "Wasn't he driving the wagon?" Lippy was sitting up, wiping mud off his head. He ran one finger under the loose lip as if he expected to find a tadpole or small fish, but all he found was mud. About that time, the Spettle boys rode up and crossed the horse herd. "Seen the cook?" Augustus asked. "Why, he's walking along carrying his gun," Bill Spettle said. "Them pigs are with him." Bolivar soon came in sight a couple 100 yards away, the blue pigs walking along beside him. "I heard a shot," Lippy said. "About that time, them mules took to running. I guess a bandit shot at us." "No confident bandit would waste a bullet on you or Bull either," Augustus said. "There ain't no reward for either of you." "Sounded like a shotgun," Bill Spettle volunteered. "Bull might have been taking target practice," Augustus said. "He might have fired at a cow pie." It don't matter what it was, Carl said. The damage is done. Augustus was enjoying the little break the accident produced. Walking along all day beside a cow herd was already proving monotonous. Any steady work had always struck him as monotonous. It was mainly accidents of one kind or another that kept life interesting, and in his view, the days otherwise being mainly repetitious things, livened up mostly by the occasional card game. It was made even more interesting a few minutes later when Bolivar walked up and handed in his resignation. He didn't even look at the smashed wagon. "I don't want to go this way," he said, addressing himself to the captain. "I am going back." "Why, Bull, you won't stand a chance," Augustus said. "A renowned criminal like you, some young sheriff out to make a reputation will hang you before you get halfway to the border." "I don't care," Bull said. "I am going back." In fact, he expected to be fired anyway. He had been dozing on the wagon seat, dreaming about his daughters, and had accidentally fired off the 10-gauge. The recoil had knocked him off the wagon, but even so it had been hard to get free of the dream. It turned into a dream in which his wife was angry, even as he awoke and saw the mules dashing away. The pigs were rooting in a rat's nest under a big cactus. Bull was so enraged by the mules' behavior that he would have shot one of them, only they were already well out of range. He had not seen the wagon go off the creek bank, but he was not surprised that it was broken. The mules were fast. He would probably not have been able to hit one of them even with a rifle, distanced as he was by the dream. The fall convinced him that he had lived long enough with the Americans. They were not his compañeros. Most of his compañeros were dead, but his country was not dead. In his village there were a few men who liked to talk about the old days when they spent all their time stealing Texas cattle. In those years his wife had not been so angry. As he walked toward the busted wagon and the little group of men, he decided to go back. He was tired of seeing his family only in his dreams. Perhaps this time when he walked in, his wife would be glad to see him. At any rate, the Americanos were going too far north. He had not really believed Augustus when he said they would ride north for several months. Most of what Augustus said was merely wind. He supposed they would ride for a few days, then sell the cattle or else start a ranch. He himself had never been more than 2 days' hard ride from the border in his life. Now a week had passed, and the Americano showed no sign of stopping. Already he was far from the river. He missed his family. Enough was enough. Carl was not especially surprised. "All right, Bull. Do you want a horse?" he asked. The old man had cooked for them for 10 years. He deserved a mount. "See," Bull said, remembering that it was a long walk back to the river and then 3 days more to his village. Carl caught the old man a gentle gelding. "I've got no saddle to give you," he said when he presented Bull the horse. Bull just shrugged. He had an extra serape and soon turned it into a saddle blanket. Apart from the gun, it was his only possession. In a moment, he was ready to start home. "Well, Bull, if you change your mind, you can find us in Montana," Augustus said. "It may be that your wife's too rusty for you now. You may want to come back and cook up a few more goats and snakes." "Gracias, Captain," Bull said when Carl handed him the reins to the gelding. Then he rode off without another word to anybody. It didn't surprise Augustus, since Bull had worked for them all those years without saying a word to anybody unless directly goaded into it, usually by Augustus. But his departure surprised and saddened Newt. It spoiled his relief that Lippy was alive. After all, he'd lost another friend, Bull, instead of Lippy. Newt didn't say so, but he would rather have lost Lippy. He didn't want Lippy to die, of course, but he wouldn't have minded if he had decided to return to Lonesome Dove. But Bull rode away from them, his old gun resting across the horse's withers. For a moment, Newt felt so sad that he almost embarrassed himself by crying. He felt his eyes fill up. How could Bull just go? He'd always been the cook, and yet in 5 minutes he was as lost to them as if he had died. Newt turned and made a show of spreading out the bedrolls, but it was mainly to conceal the fact that he felt sad. If people kept leaving, they'd be down to nobody before they even got north of Texas. Riding away, Bolivar too felt very sad. Now that he was going, he was not sure why he decided to go. Perhaps it was because he didn't want to face embarrassment. After all, he had fired the shot that caused the mules to run. Also, he didn't want to get so far north that he couldn't find his way back to the river. And as he rode away, he decided he had made another stupid choice. So far, in his opinion, almost every decision in his life had been stupid. He didn't miss his wife that much. They had lost the habit of one another and might not be able to reacquire it. He felt a little bitter as he rode away. The captain should not have let him go. After all, he was the only man among them who could cook. He didn't really like the Americanos, but he was used to them. It was too bad they had suddenly decided to get so many cattle and go north. Life in Lonesome Dove had been easy. Goats were plentiful and easy to catch, and his wife was the right distance away. When he grew bored, he could beat the dinner bell with the broken crowbar. For some reason, it gave him great satisfaction to beat the dinner bell. It had little to do with dinner or anything. It was just something he liked to do. When he stopped, he could hear the echoes of his work fading into Mexico. He decided that since he was in no hurry, he would stop in Lonesome Dove and beat the bell a few more times. He could say it was the captain's orders. The thought was comforting. It made up for the fact that most of his decisions had been stupid. He rode south without looking back.